Welcome back to Moby Dick. In our last post, we finished the novel. I skipped ahead on you and I rushed through the last 2/3 or at least 1/2 of the novel, and I didn't tell you what happened, but I promised I'd come back. So now I'm back. And I've done some thinking. I'm not going to go through this bit by bit. We're going to talk about something else instead. I mentioned in an earlier post in which I summarized the emerging themes of the novel at that time. The role of the subversive novel in great literature and in the literary canon itself. And I'd like to redirect ourselves to that line of thinking right now. I talked about the relevance of the canon and the necessity, really, of understanding why the canon is what it is and how each one of these books got to be canonized, so to speak, in the first place. It was never an easy process for any of them. At the time of their publication, without exception to my knowledge, each book that is now considered a piece of literary must-read, intellectual exercising, and so forth, all of that was considered dangerous to the status quo. This is, many of us will argue, an essential quality of any form of art. At the time that it comes out, whether it's the Beatles, or whether it's beat poetry, or whether it's Moby Dick, or even Christianity, actually, all of these things are revolutionary, and they all change the world afterwards, permanently, for better or for worse, depending on who you're talking to. Now, after the fact, many years after the fact in some cases, it's very easy to sit back and say, oh, it's establishment, oh, it's status quo, oh, it's always been around, oh, it's oppressive, it's the power structure, it's the patriarchy, all that stuff. But at one point or another, it was all new and dangerous. Moby Dick is exceptionally dangerous. It's also not very easy to read, which is why so many people don't, or they buy the Cliff Notes, or they listen to people like me talk about it, and then they pretend that they actually did the reading themselves. The main reason why I am not going to walk through the last 80 chapters or so, bit by bit with you, is because I actually do want you to read them. The experience of reading these chapters is the point of the novel. I'll explain that more later. So I stranded you at chapter 53. I stopped blogging every chapter or every couple of chapters, and I stopped touching base with you and assessing where we are and what we think is going on and what we expect might be happening and what these weird themes are and who the narrators might be and why this could all be happening. When I stopped posting every couple of chapters, I really did plan on going back and recreating all of those posts, which would have left us with probably 40 additional blog posts or something like that. And after I finished the novel a couple of days ago, I sat down and I started thinking about how I wanted to go about doing that. And even this morning, I was looking through my notes and I was looking back online at the websites powermobydick.com and schmoop.com. And I was reading through what they say about the novel. I didn't read any of it going forward or, ahead of time because I didn't want any spoilers. But having read it now, I went back, having read the novel now, I went back and I read what these sites say. And I thought that it would help me explain myself. And I came to a couple of conclusions. One is, I disagree with a lot of what's being said. It's not wrong, it's just that it's not entirely right either. I don't think it goes far enough. But also, like I said, the experience of reading these last 80 chapters, it's one that nobody else can do for you. I want to do something different here with this blog. This blog, Literary Zoe, is not going to be a study guide. I am not going to tell you what to write or what to say to get an A in class, or what to think to be considered erudite and pithy and smart. This isn't school. This here is the muddy, murky place where all of the books that we read smash into the lives that we lead. And here in the muck, I want to talk about one question. So what? Long after we diagram and dissect a piece of literature or a poem or a song or a painting, if any of these things are ever relevant, if any of them can ever be called art in the truest sense of the word, they need to mean something. They need to matter. And not in the sense that you can write a thesis about it and be considered smart and get tenure. It needs to matter to you personally. It's got to touch your heart. And there is no way to recreate that experience for somebody else. And you shouldn't let them. So I recommend that you go on to the Shmoop website. They're very, very thorough. They go through every chapter. They talk about themes. They talk about characters, plot analysis, technique, all symbolism, allegory, all kinds of great stuff. It's relevant. It's good. It's academically sound. If you throw these things around, people will think that you read the whole damn book, and you must be really, really smart. But if you go through the process of reading the next 80 chapters, you will realize that none of what they say, while it's not wrong, although I do disagree with their assessments of some of the characters and some of the narration style. Anyway, it's not glaringly wrong. It's missing out on the one main point, I think, of the novel. I mentioned to you before that I believe that this novel is about the quest or the hunt or the search for the eternal. And you can translate that as being, the quest for God. You can talk about the identity of God, what that even means. You can talk about religion. You can talk about what is man, what is death, what is life. All of these things come in under the umbrella of being the eternal. Shmoop and probably Cliff Notes or whatever passes for Cliff Notes these days, they're not going there. And really, how can you? Because Moby Dick is a literary, fictional attempt at discussing hardcore theology and philosophy and trying to make sense of what it is to be alive and what it is to be a man or a god, what it is to be sane, what it is to be unhappy, and whether we can know. At the end of it all, it even wonders whether or not it's relevant. I don't know. There's something wonderful that happens at the end of the book. Of course, you already know everyone dies except Ishmael. As they die, though, bit by bit, they just vanish. No one, not even Ahab, is given a grand death scene. They just leave the conversation. They're no longer discussed. Everyone just goes under the water and vanishes. And as soon as the ship sinks, the novel stops. There's no conclusion. There's no happily ever after. There's no, and rocks fell down and everyone died. There's nothing. It just stops. You don't go through over 600 pages of intense description about everything under the sun, most of it being erroneous and confusing, and a lot of it being very funny, and not wrap it up. But that's exactly what happens. So in the next one or two posts, I don't know yet how many this is going to turn into, I'm going to talk briefly about the so-called correct readings of Moby Dick and what to expect from the next chapters, the rest of the novel. But I'm also going to talk about what I think goes on. In short, over the next 80 chapters, we get the bulk of the famous chapters upon chapters about bits and pieces of the whale. that don't seem to have anything to do with anything at all. They are everything in this novel. There are apparently, at least I'm convinced, there are more than one narrator. There is more than one narrator writing these different chapters about different parts of the whale, different attributes of the whale, ways to understand the whale, ways the whale shows up in popular culture, the ways that it shows up in mythology, what it means to be a whale, and what the whale's presence or absence means in various contexts. All of these things, they're talked about by different people. Each chapter is an attempt to approach that which cannot be explained, that which cannot be named, and that which cannot really be understood. It's a process of tacking and approaching from another point. And ultimately, we never get to our destination. We never come up with an adequate explanation for what the whale is. And then at the moment of the hunt, of course, we don't catch him. So that will be the next 1 or 2 posts. And then we're going to wrap up Moby Dick. It's a strange book, and it can be hard to read. But do so. Do yourself the honor and respect of experiencing this book. That's part of the experience. Hang in there with it. It's worth it.